Hello, my name is Kazuma Hashimoto, and welcome to I See a Pale Moon Rising, Nightmare Host Coast to Coast. I am one of the many hosts of this interesting and riveting Bloodborne-based podcast. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a cultural media analyst and a translator. Casey, why don't you take it away?
My name is Casey Crook. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a writer and critic, and I'll throw to Chris.
Hi, I'm Christian Geldart. Pronouns are he, him. I make some things. I write tabletop games. I have pretty extensive experience with this game. Probably in the hundreds of hours. Not even probably. It is. I think Kazuma see my save files, and it's probably over 500. But yeah. And then Mikey.
Hi, my name is Mikey Z, and my pronouns are he, him. I am a podcaster, writer, and graphic designer, and tabletop game designer. Many hats. And the one hat I have not worn is the Hunter's Tricorn hat. I've watched some streams of this game. I've read some wiki articles. I have most of my experience third party from my good friend Casey and Chris talking about it, but I have not played it myself because reluctantly or unfortunately I do not own a PS4. So this is my first experience in the linear fashion with Yharnam and its related environs.
Yeah, totally. And like this podcast is basically going to be about like kind of exploring and like kind of investigating and interrogating the strange spaces in this game. I think all of us here, I think it's kind of a game that's kind of rich with like kind of intended kind of readings and like kind of subtext, and kind of what can be read into it. It's most From Software games are very kind of like having strong worlds. I think this one might have maybe, along with Sekiro, maybe like kind of the strongest like unified, I don't know, as a place. I don't know if everyone here would agree with that. But yeah, as this is like kind of Mikey's first introduction, we're actually going to be like kind of making a new game, and there might be the whole podcast. The whole podcast might be not be kind of following through the new game, but just so kind of Mikey can kind of see the opening. So, which I don't know if you've seen before, Mikey, but
I don't think so.
Yeah, Chasm's on the sticks for us. So do you want to like show Mikey this opening here?
Yeah, let's go ahead and start. Here we go, our first introductory cutscene to Bloodborne.
Oh, yeah. Pale blood. Well, you've come to the right place. Yharnam is the home of blood administration. You need only unravel its mystery. But where's an outsider like yourself to begin? Easy, with a bit of Yharnam blood of your own. But first, you'll need a contract.
And right there is most of the lore for the game, or at least what it gives you from the outset. Yeah. So character creation is great. You can make some real monsters in it.
Unfortunately, I'm making someone very attractive. I'm very good at making good-looking Bloodborne characters, so you'll have to deal with that.
Whereas I revel in making absolute monsters.
Yeah, so can I just talk about that cutscene for a second?
Please do.
Because I feel like, with what little I know of the game, I feel like there's a lot of multiple layers of interpretation going on there. So first off, like, I know a lot of this game is playing with not being clear exactly who the player character is and what their role in this is. And even though I feel like a lot of the sense that I get is that this character is an outsider, like, the immediate step of that cutscene was also, I almost felt as if you had, like, the player character you had some immediate connection to the world of Bloodborne, to this town. because it's like a little bit of Yharnam blood of your own. And that could, like, to me, that could be read as giving you Yharnam blood, or that you have Yharnam blood inside you. And it doesn't talk, like, it's not clear also whether pale blood is, like, third party to you, or whether you are pale blood. So, am I reading that right?
Well, I think that there's
I would
any
say-
way. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I would say that's a fair read because I think at least part of the like first section of the game is being an immigrant into Yharnam, and having some like diffusal and friction between being new to this space and having a connection to the space and the people in the area, learning about what's happening in here, and the people in the area kind of pushing back on that and pushing back on you, and seeing kind of through both eyes, as a newcomer like to the game. It's a good introduction, but then it also like puts you in the character's shoes because your character is new here, at least you can assume.
Yeah, it's like the premise, it's narrative premise, as much as your kind of character needs it, is like to kind of find out what's going on. A lot of this game is about kind of uncovering hidden truths, and they kind of set you up from the beginning of just like kind of they throw out a few of these words of like, oh, what do these mean? Like, am I going to find answers to what pale blood is? Am I going to like, what is the Arnhem blood? Why is that special? Yeah, and also this thing about kind of being like an immigrant to this space. Like, I think we'll talk about more as you kind of go a bit further in about like how both the gameplay and the game design and like the areas are like inherently confusing.
Mm-hmm.
The spaces are abstract. Yeah, let's jump into it. Let's get our. Are we going Nobel? Or are we going Nobel? Noble.
Yeah, so before we begin, I want to talk about the various basically starting classes you get, quote unquote. So you have Milquetoast, Lone Survivor, Troubled Childhood, Violent Past, Professional, Military Veteran, Noble Scion, Cruel Fate, and Waste of Skin. And based on the Noble Scion starting, I feel like there's a connection to somewhere we're going to see later. Just keep that in mind moving forward. I will be picking this this starting build. And no, Chris, I will not be increasing the vitality.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to be muted for most of the section, so.
Yeah, Kazuma's going to focus on hopefully not just absolutely eating it, which will happen because the game is like it's hard when you first start because you don't have any weapons or anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's going to be a cutscene here in a second, so
Okay, I'll be
I'd love
quiet
to hear
then.
your thoughts on this also, Mikey.
Okay.
Well, you can talk over it if you want because I can just mute you in the edit.
Yeah,
Haha.
I was just gonna say, it does, like, maybe this is cliche of me, but I'm also getting, like, shades of Silent Hill 2, where it's, like, a space you've heard of, but...
Good. All signed and sealed. Now, let's begin the transfusion. Oh, don't you worry. Whatever happens,
Looking at the
you
ceiling,
may
are we
think
having
it all
thoughts?
a mere bad dream.
Is that a different ceiling?
Same ceiling, different lighting.
Okay.
Well, that's new.
You found yourself a hunter.
Oh, so it's a transfusion. Okay, I see.
And that blood pool's gone, if it was ever here.
Or, if you didn't die and come back to life, Evanescent style. I was just going to say before, like, it may be a little cliche of me, but I was getting, like, shades of Silent Hill 2 before, of, like, a place that you've heard of and maybe been to before, but you're not expressly familiar with. But now I'm definitely getting, like, a different vibe now that we've seen that, like, second cutscene.
Yeah, so the game's already kind of laying up, like, kind of questions and stuff. But yeah, I think at this point we kind of, like, just run through the areas. Yeah, so this is an important area in the game. We're not going to talk about it just yet, because we will come back to it later. Maybe multiple times, I'm not sure. There is, like, a bunch of kind of interesting things going on here.
Yeah. I do want to say really quick, I do love the wood paneling here.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, this game is full of, like, kind of dark wood and, like, kind of details, and, like, I think it's worth kind of pointing out now, it'll kind of be consistent throughout, is a lot of the kind of the plasterwork and the buildings, kind of the majority of the buildings are, like, decaying, like, floorboards are kind of, like, ripped up or, like, misaligned. Like, from the off, it's like this is a place that was either already in decline before we kind of got here, where, like, maintaining things was hard, or whatever has happened has led to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, you open up from this healing clinic right into a graveyard, which is,
And Yosefka's clinic is like technically like our first area of the game, but you get to see such a small portion of like what it actually is. And then I think to go from this mysterious decaying clinic into this massive spooky graveyard that has, at least for Kazuma right now, like has a werewolf chasing after you. And it's just such an interesting like introduction, I think, to this world. And like as you move in, like the first, I mean, there are like dead horses and carriages everywhere throughout here.
Yeah, so we should probably take a look at kind of this carriage, and also on the other side there's like a much larger carriage. And a lot of these details are kind of in this area, like, kind of repeat. But you can kind of see, like, there are these kind of chained coffins. There are, if you kind of go down to the bench just below us, we can kind of see there are these chests full of, like, small blood vials and stuff. And also we get this great view of, like, an area we will be visiting later, kind of down below. And, like, we can see how this is a city that's kind of built maybe over a ravine or in levels or on top of itself. It's kind of not quite clear yet what's going on, but it's a pretty, like, arresting image in terms of just, like, this space is, like, unreal. And yeah, and also there's, I kind of want to touch on this kind of quickly, and I'll be kind of throughout again. A lot of the architecture here is like neo-Gothic. It's kind of like Gothic revival. There's a lot of these kind of tall towers which are kind of I think there's a lot of kind of the Sir Walter Scott monument in Edinburgh in them. Like, I think Edinburgh is a pretty big inspiration for this game. I think also kind of the French spires.
Actually, I will interject here. Romania was actually a major inspiration for this game. The development team actually flew to Romania to sketch out architecture and buildings. So it's actually East Europe that is a huge inspiration for this game.
Oh, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Yeah, it's this like, it's a very interesting space, and like, I think we don't. I think what we won't be focusing on too much is like kind of the play-by-play moment of every area, because then this podcast would become very, very long. I think there is a lot to talk about all these areas, but so this isn't just, a 50-hour episode. I'll try and keep it kind of like focused and tight. And so we actually do have like kind of a focus for the kind of this first episode. Casey, do you want to kind of introduce us to this kind of first concept? Because
Yeah.
we're going to see our first game.
I think One thing that Chris actually brought it up just a second ago, that Yarnum has this kind of inaccessible like verticality to it, and in addition, like it has these gates everywhere, and these like impassable terrain is like built into the streets of Yarnum, and I think it's an interesting like testament to why this space is built the way that it is. As something we discover later, that like they need to lock off like city blocks at a time from each other, and they need to I don't know. It's just such an interesting, like, striking image to the first thing you do after you walk through this graveyard is open this big gate, and then as you go further down the road, you notice there's another big gate, and then the way that you get to the next area is you climb this like 100-foot ladder, and just the thought of like someone living in this space and someone like having their home here, and just saying, okay, let me go pick up bread. Oh, the gate's closed.
Yeah, it's a city we can very easily imagine like has like built-in kind of checkpoints, and like I think it's so this city obviously is a video game city. It doesn't necessarily work in a real capacity, but we're going to treat it to a degree as though these spaces are more coherent than they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of just the level of like what's around. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're fine. I was just going to add on to that it's actually like worthwhile to mention what I was going to mention about the clinic is like that doesn't feel like a space that's a clinic. It feels like, just even at first blush to me, it feels like a repurposed space. It's more like a town hall or a municipal building in terms of its open spaces and the way the flow of the building is. Because then it's broken down into like little lab benches and recovery beds and stuff like that. But it's not like, if it were built as a clinic, I feel like it would be a more purposeful space. You know what I mean? And so I get a lot of the sense of like the architecture of this city has been like reappropriated for other uses as the decline has happened.
Yeah, there's like boxes and like there's coffins. There's like what supplies of like oil and stuff just like everywhere. Like kind of various levels of preparedness. What was it? All like reactiveness to kind of what's going on here. Yeah. And there's that werewolf.
Yeah, because even like the medicine cabinets and stuff that are in these rooms, like they're covering like friezes and wood paneling, and they're just kind of like at odd angles, and it doesn't feel, it feels very like we move this in, to be a semi-permanent thing, but this was not the original intention.
Yeah. I think also like kind of being kind of someone who's like kind of been in spaces like university kind of areas and other things, I think there's like what's the word? I think it's like obviously a space that seems to have been repurposed, and I'm not sure how much of that is down to kind of as a game assets. Like it clearly has like these kind of materials and stuff. That's interesting. That chair is like, I think that's a chair we will return to much later. Has very implications.
Something I actually wanted to add on to what Mikey said was that so the chairs that I've been looking at, those look like church pews.
Yeah, absolutely.
So these.
I was thinking that.
Yeah,
too.
I was thinking like this looked like a church. Like in a lot of the ways, because talk about verticality, the Gothic and kind of like Byzantine architecture, knowing this is based on Eastern Europe and Romania, that makes a lot of sense, because like Eastern Europe, that came from more of the Byzantine tradition after, the Great Schism of the Catholic Church. And there was really like, you look at the Hagia Sophia and everything, there's like the roofs are like domes where they have, the high windows to let the light in, and, lots of flying buttresses and stuff like that. And when you went down that staircase out of the first room of the clinic, there were kind of that high arched window with the god rays, like that felt very church-like to me. And some of that, of course, I assume is to already like get you into the mode of like what this game is, and the themes of it, but also in terms of architecture, like it felt very church-like. So I wouldn't be surprised if that had been like a church or religious structure before it became a clinic.
Yeah, and the whole city has this kind of aesthetic of like kind of almost being built out of churches. I think it's worth like kind of pointing out here, like the arches are kind of over the doors and stuff. Like again, it kind of mentioned like neo-Gothic kind of style, and I kind of like want to kind of go over this again. If like neo-Gothic as a style is kind of, it's a revival of Gothic, but also it has its own kind of unique thing of like there's kind of a philosophy of like asymmetry within it. Like in this whole city, it's not like neat. You kind of see it feels almost as though like the city is growing out of the ground. It's like ramshackle, things are at odd angles, like spires overlap. It feels almost like an organic space, even though it's made out of like brick and oil and like fire. It still feels to a degree like a kind of organic space.
Yeah, and even the streets, you know, with all the statuary and everything, like it feels very oppressive. And the way, like it also, and I know I'm maybe getting ahead of myself, but even if I didn't know some of the stuff about this game, like it feels like the seat of a church or religious body. Like you look at like Venice, and the way that is around like the Doge and, you know, everything near the Vatican, how you have all this religious statuary. And even like I grew up in the DC area, and the, you know, one of the biggest Roman Catholic archdioceses, the Archdiocese of Arlington, is there. And also like American University and Catholic University, which are like huge Catholic institutions. And those being built so early on like kind of influence the architecture around them to have this like religious iconography and statuary, and like even the houses, because the houses want to match like the buildings that are around, and I'm getting kind of the same sense in this area.
So we just pass on and play again, like again, because it kind of the game really just hammer in. I'm not sure the right phrase there. Of like how many gates there are. How this is a city that you can lock down. Like we can see there is a gate being pounded on, and then we come around the corner and we see what is trying to get through or who is trying to get through. And like we are probably like a quarter of a mile into the city, and we've already passed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 6 or something gates in various manners. Like this, I think it's worth kind of pulling out like it for this particular area of the game. how this part of the city has been built with these kind of outbreaks with this kind of like the beast curse, kind of people turning to beasts as part of daily life. Like this is a city that has accepted that as part of daily life and has like made like structural changes to itself to like adapt to that and to try and control and contain that. And there'll be an area we visit like not too later, maybe the next episode, I'm not sure, which will kind of show like a difference and maybe why this city now has all these kind of like different blockages and stuff.
I think it's also worth noting that the first like NPC that we encounter is a half-dead werewolf that's just like feral, and then after that we don't see someone like directly impacted by any of this plague for some time. Like if you're assuming you're new to the game, I think almost everyone's first experience with this game is trying to make it past this massive mob of people. And so I think, but this mob of people is also decorated by all of these, it's a mix of like flaming werewolves, because they've like strung up the werewolves and like set them on fire, and these like mournful statues that have just kind of littered the streets, and then they're actually just all over the Great Bridge. And I think it very much encapsulates that I think the most striking thing about this first area of Yharnam is that there are clearly a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
And the decoration and like the physical, like the hard physical things are feel very Catholic. It communicates that there is some strong organized religion that has like worked its way into the very bones of the society, insofar as they built structures consistently in a way that they couldn't help but have the god rays. They couldn't help but have this amazing verticality, even if it was just like a space for a clinic, or if it was just a space to house sick people, or just the facade of a building.
Yeah.
I want to make Oh, sorry. I want to make one correction really quickly before we move on. The bodies that we're burning aren't actually werewolves. They're going to be something that we do encounter later on in the game, and I'm going to be triggering something right now. So when this happens, I'll be doing it once, and then I will be swapping characters. So feel free to talk amongst yourselves until Mikey sees the thing.
Yes. Okay. So while we're on this bridge, I want to quickly address like kind of the design of this bridge. The I need to get the name of these things. Are they pillars? I think they're pillars on the side. They're all kind of based on the kind of the Fletch style like spire you kind of find in like neo-Gothic churches. And again, it's another element kind of re-upping the kind of the religious overtones and like connections in like everyday. Or I say everyday. This is like a important place. And they really kind of throw it at you like throughout this whole area of just like, hey, this is like the church is important here.
Yeah. Also, what's really interesting to me is like, again, I'll be drawing on a lot of my like Catholic upbringing here. Oh, hello.
Hello, friend.
Oh, I know this friend. Cleric Beasts. The other thing that's really interesting to me is these statues all have candles in their hands, like outreached, as if they are like desperately sharing the candles with you, which is like the exact opposite meaning of like when you typically associate like in Catholicism and Catholic ritual like statues and candles. Like usually you light a candle in like prayer offering to a saint or Mary or Jesus, in association with a prayer. And here it's like some of these candles are lit, the majority of them are not, but it's almost as if they're offering the passerby the candle in kind of like a desperate way, which is really like the tone that it sets is really interesting, but also like the flipping of that nature of like statue and candle is really interesting to me.
Yeah, like these are not happy. They're not. These statues don't feel like aspirational. They don't feel like as though they're trying to communicate like a sense of like upliftingness. They all feel like they're like in some form of desperation.
Yeah.
And this game is like full of like interesting statues. And I think there's definitely some like as you kind of go through, we'll pull out like other areas that have kind of more statues. There's a specific monument, kind of in one of the later kind of very soon areas, Cathedral Ward, which has like an even closer kind of thing to the Scots monument, which is, I think almost like a 1-to-1 even, and like statuary and this kind of recording in stone of like kind of the city of like kind of the mood of the city is like all over, and lots of different areas of the game like kind of do some really interesting ways, like have like I would say almost every area in the game has like its own kinds of statues, and I think they all do kind of riff on each other and have like relationships to each other. Yeah.
This is a different topic. If you had something there, sorry.
No, go for it. I'm happy for this to just be us riffing and seeing where we go.
So I think one thing, Kazuma just did the cleric beast fight, and is going to go back to that area with that cleared out. But one thing that strikes me is, again, like your first experience, you climb up and you talk to this man, Gilbert, and he says the way to get help, he, like in so many words, the way to get help is essentially you cross the Great Bridge and you go to Cathedral Ward, you go to the church. And You fight your way up to the Great Bridge, and then this giant monster shows up, and you kind of assume, okay, video game logic, I fight this monster, and then I get through the Great Bridge, and it's all okay. Well, once you do that, there's a big gate, and there's a locked door that you can't interact with.
It's great. It's like there's another gate, and there's a door you cannot open. And also, like, worth knowing this point, you can never open in the game.
Mm-hmm. And it just like adds this testament to the fact that people know it introduces like two things. One is that this space has the capability to help people, because people know that you go to the cathedral and you go to the church and the church helps you. But at the same time, there's that dichotomy where there are so many gates, there are so many ways for the city to like triage itself and just essentially just cut off its appendages and like let things starve out and essentially just leave people high and dry.
Yeah, and I do have to wonder, like, we talk about gates and the locking thereof, like, I do have to wonder how many of these gates like are based in actual architecture, because like thinking through it, Romania and this kind of like post-medieval architecture, like castles were made to do stuff like that, and as like cities build off from castles, you would have kind of like you talk about an onion having layers, like that was kind of how castles and cities were built to keep sieges, and if one part of the wall would be destroyed, not all of it would be destroyed, and it was kind of built to be redundant in that way. And I wonder, like, arches are so, you have the Arc de Triomphe and all these famous arches, that was like the architectural style. And I do kind of have to wonder, like, to what extent these gates were, thinking of Yharnam as a real city, these gates were constructed from the beginning of Yharnam and then just repurposed for this plague. Because I do think that's like a real possibility. I feel like that could have come from real architecture. Like, it's not just a video game thing.
I think it's a really interesting point you kind of raised with the castles thing of like, who's a castle like protecting really? Like, what is it? Say who's protecting really? Like, who is it ultimately protecting? Who is the safest in a castle? And it's the person who is in the keep, right? It's the person who is in the deepest part. The other areas are like essentially they are like blockades. And like they are stopping progress towards those at the heart of the castle. Like, obviously the gates are there to kind of protect those within each areas, but if those areas fall, then it's not as important. Yeah, Kazuma, do you want to read this note out for us?
All right, I can read this note. When the hunt began, the healing church abandoned us, blocking the great bridge to the cathedral ward as they burned old Yharnam to the ground on that moonlit night.
So evocative. Like, it's just like from the off, like, yo, the healing church here, and they just fucked everyone over.
And I think to Mikey's point too, it implies that this city was actually rebuilt, or that this is an entirely different city from a different thing, and so that this implies that this city was built to prevent why ever they burned old Yharnam to the ground, prevent that from happening again.
Yeah. And that is something that definitely happens in real life. Like Rome, we see, the aqueducts and everything like that, are relics of the Roman Empire. Like, there have been like 5 different versions of that. Even like London, you have the ancient stuff from, Romans coming in and stuff even from before that. And then, Victorian, and then with the bombings in World War II, stuff was leveled and built over the top. Like, that's a very real thing.
Yeah, and also it's like I kind of like trying to like I have this kind of most of this game mapped in my head, but I'm not sure how much of this kind of game does touch on aspects of rebuilding and kind of repurposing. Like, a kind of, at least in Britain, there is a kind of a long tradition of like taking bits of like old Roman architecture and kind of reusing and rebuilding those blocks. Kind of the reasons why a lot of Roman ruins don't exist anymore is because when people need materials for building, they took the stone from the ruins and used those. And so we have buildings here in the UK and probably other parts of Europe also that are kind of kind of constructed out of a mix of kind of new materials and kind of repurposing of old. And that kind of comes to the space like this is a city that's repurposing itself from what already seems to be a city that is kind of ready to kind of lock itself down, and is even then it's beginning to store like supplies. It's kind of in this particular kind of area now, like is storing kind of like barrels of gunpowder and like various supplies, like kind of like oil here and so on, like in spaces that were not maybe originally intended for.
And I think one other important thing that we talked about the this being a video game space, and to some degree, the architecture is level design. That you have to design something not only in a way that makes sense, but also in a way that is fun to play. And so to some extent, it's kind of what we're doing here is kind of playing outside of the bounds of 100% of what the designers had in mind. But I think it's totally fair to recognize that in this space, this is not a game that pretends that there aren't disabled people in the world. This is a game that has enemies and characters in wheelchairs, and it also has stairs and 100-foot ladders and things like that. And it's interesting that you have to climb like 20, 30 stairs through a clinic, and climb like 100-foot ladder and then go down a few stairs, and then there's an old man sitting in a wheelchair. And I think again, it goes back to Mikey's point and Chris's point of like, who is this protecting and like, who is this serving, of like, who is being served, I don't know.
Yeah. And again, like as I'm showing right now, there's like this detail of like, there is like all forms of like desecration of bodies, or like cruelty done to people, or like or various ways of trying to bury or hold people in kind of various forms. And I don't know if it's necessarily cruelty, and it is cruel, like this kind of person bound even as a corpse. But it kind of speaks to the way of like people here, at least the people we're kind of like in this immediate area, just don't really know how to handle this. Don't know the best way of doing it, kind of trying everything to kind of like deal with the problem they're facing.
I think it's definitely a sign of a cruelty born out of fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
People will do awful things to people or individuals they don't understand or they're afraid of, in this case, like a plague, like the lengths people will do to try to stay away from that, or to be free of that quote unquote corruption, which could be used as a proxy for anything, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't think we've heard the barks from the enemies, but like as Kaz was saying, like a lot of the kind of the enemy barks, as in like kind of the call outs they kind of give towards the player, are all about like they're like, you're better off dead, you shouldn't be here, it's all your fault. It's all about engaging the player, who is like kind of set up as being an outsider, as being responsible for this. And that when you kind of first come through this game, you don't have any idea for why these people might not like you, or might kind of think you are responsible for this. And yeah, I think there's definitely a thing of like, well, you're an outsider, so it's your fault.
And well, I was just gonna say off of what Chris was saying, that there is also the idea of, why should we help you? Like, you're stuck out on the night of a hunt. That sucks.
Yeah, you go up to some of the doors here, like with the lanterns, and everyone like they literally laugh in your face and like, ha ha ha, wow, it sucks to be you out there. No follow up, just like, okay, you can leave.
Yeah.
Please leave my door.
Yeah.
We don't know if it's just like for this night, or if it is like a thing that has, if that is the mood in the city always. Sorry, I think Kazuma, you're gonna say something.
Oh, I think it speaks to the idea of the fear of the other, which is pretty common in cosmic horror, for example. And like I think that was mentioned earlier, like coming to the city as an immigrant and people basically laughing at your face when you're asking for help because you're not from there. or people blaming outsiders or people that are not from Yarnum specifically for bringing up the hunt, people turning into beasts, that kind of thing. That's kind of the only comment I wanted to make as I get chased by crows.
Yeah.
Especially like having had all these people have been trying to escape and they can't escape. Meanwhile, you got a transfusion of Yarnum blood to make you more like them. Like there's something going on there that is like, yeah, if I were in someone from this town and I saw this person coming in and being like, yeah, I got Yarnum blood, what's up? I would I would have some feelings about that too. None of them good, honestly.
The infamous sewer drop. I fell for that my first game through. My first playthrough of this game was like, try rolling. Oh, okay, I will.
I watched my boyfriend do that, and he was like, "No."
So FromSoft Soulsborne players are mostly fun and chill and cool.
And they're curious.
Mostly.
They're always curious.
Yes, and then there's just everyone's an asshole. Also, it's a thing.
Yeah. I am thinking about this space a lot in relation to the infamous Half-Life 2 level Ravenholm. And specifically, like, there's a sequence where you go through, like, 4 houses and you're navigating, like, up and down through those houses. And the interesting thing about Ravenholm is it was built largely as a tech demo. Like, that was a bunch of vertical slices that were stitched together. And, in the time that came out, it felt very revolutionary to navigate that space. It was very creepy. Like it felt to me at the time as like a believable space. But going back to it today, I think Robert Yang wrote a piece about it like within the last couple years about, or maybe it was a Twitter thread, I don't know, but about how it was just like 4x4. It was like a 16x16 grid that just had like strategic holes cut through it. And like when you look at it from a remove and through like today's lens of like level design, it really sticks out as not like a realistic space at all. And the only reason you believe it's a space is because you're going, like a livable space is because you're going up and down and traversing up and down. And it kind of leads you on this merry chase. And you look at that, and something that is very clearly like that literally just is a 16x16 grid that's got, strategic holes marked through it so you feel like you're passing through, versus something like this, which does, even though it is a video game level, it feels more designed as a physical space that you just happen to be, using as a video game level. Especially with, stairs and stuff like that. Half-Life 2, it's just like ramps and, holes through a wall so that head crabs can pop out through something and spook you. And, I think level design has evolved over the years, but it also just goes to, I think, a different philosophy. Like Half-Life 2 is really like, what's going to make the best action sequence and how can we reutilize these vertical slices and kind of moment to moment gameplay, and how can we stitch that together. Whereas FromSoft, I think, really does sit down and say like, how can we create a space? Because also like the going from the canal area that we were just in, the sewer area, versus like the canal route in Half-Life 2 again, like it has kind of this vibe of these like Italian underground aqueduct sewers, but then when you really sit back and think about it and compare it to like the real life thing, there's like no comparison, and the geometry of the space just totally does not work. Whereas I've seen like Dirty Jobs and some of the like even more like history and architecture documentaries where they go through these ancient sewers and waterways, and the stuff in Bloodborne like feels more like one of those spaces. It's not only like on a superficial geometrical level, but also like the branching pathways and nothing being completely straight because, it's hand built.
I think there's also kind of I mean, Kazma's doing kind of the opposite of what I'm going to say at this point. It's like this opening part of the game, I think, is really designed to, and I think both through its architecture in terms of the enemy place and how many enemies are here, I think this part of the game has maybe it's among the areas with the most enemies in one place. Like this whole opening section of the game is like to overwhelm you. I think a lot of people kind of consider it being like if you can get through the kind of the first area of the game, you'll kind of be set. But like really, when you kind of come down through this main street the first time, I mean, Kazuma just like wrecked house, but normally you would just like kind of bang your head against this and just be completely overwhelmed by enemies jumping out at you, like kind of all the kind of visual and like audio stimuli. Like you go to every door and people are laughing and like telling you to leave and so on, and like it really is a space that is trying to like overwhelm you as a player.
Yeah. So now we're kind of in. I get the sense that this is like a main gate and square in the town. So you had like the main gate that was like the two giant doors, and then you have the two side gates that have like metal gates on both sides of the wall. And I feel like that's a very common like type of architecture, like when you have the city gates, because you have the big ones and then you have the small side passages that guards and whatever would go through, and then in the middle of that square is this giant burning edifice of a werewolf person.
Yeah.
Not unlike the cleric beast, I assume.
Also, I think we've passed it a few times. You can see right in front of us, right here, like where Kazuma is right now. We can see there are kind of carts full of bones. We can see actually there are barrels full of ash and burned bodies. Like they've put bodies into these like barrels and set them alight to basically burn away the blood. It's really interesting. I think like we kind of explored most of this area. Kind of like I think we could keep talking about this area like all the time, but again, like I said before, we want to kind of get through most of the thing. I think Kazuma, can you take us through to the Cathedral Ward and just kind of like to kind of end on this kind of thing about gates as kind of our main focus here? Like I think that has maybe the most kind of important and like structurally impressive gates are kind of like in the early areas of the Cathedral Ward.
Yeah, I can take us there right now.
Thank
We
you.
will miss out on a cutscene of a specific character, but that should be okay.
Yeah, I would say I think what we can do is we can kind of do a catch up where we kind of go through and like kind of go through more of the characters and cutscenes and stuff. I think I have like there's a lot of interesting stuff about like that particular character, both in terms of like how in the early game you can kind of bring them in, and then kind of their narrative arc is very interesting, and I think does say some interesting things about the city.
Yeah, just really quick, like to go back to Casey's much earlier point about inaccessible verticality. I love just the detail of on some of these like towers. As you're climbing, you see lights that are on in inaccessibly high areas that are open, inferring that there's people or someone keeping those lights lit far away from the fray of whatever's going on in Yharnam.
Like there might still be people, at least at the outset of the game, who are still sheltering, who aren't out in the streets, who are still in this kind of place of weathering whatever is going on.
But they're above, whatever is plaguing literally the people on the streets.
Yeah.
Out of harm's reach, if you will.
And I think, again, the area that we're coming up on now, which is the... I forget what it's called, but it's...
This is Erden's graveyard. The graveyard of Erden's chapel. Odin.
Yeah. They different characters say it a different way. But I think it's also interesting, like, imagining, like, living in this space. Presumably you have a loved one that might be buried here. And there are just two massive gates on either side of it that like could easily lock you in or out of this thing. And one of those gates leads into the sewer of another chapel.
Yeah, which we're going to go to like right now. But yeah, it's this thing of like the graveyards are gated, the graveyards are locked. Like there's this again with we see kind of in this area that kind of graves are guarded, graves are kind of locked away. the first grave we come across outside the church, the chapel, sorry, the clinic is itself like gated. Like they all have some kind of form of like locking them down, which means there is obviously a concern about like either people getting at these bodies or those bodies leaving.
And yeah, basically.
Yeah, and all the coffins are chained.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't need to worry about what's going on there.
Don't worry about that.
Please ignore that. I'm on my new game plus on this character. Please ignore that.
That's going to be spoiler. Please ignore.
Well, and then like, are you sorry? You go first, Casey.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that that's something that we can kind of get into next time, is because we talked about maybe talking about some of like the canals and sewers for next time. And I think part of the fear stems from some of the things that you, as the player, find in those spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another piece of text here. Do you want to read this out for us? 'Cause this is, I think we'll come back to this kind of piece of text later. So maybe it's slightly later, but do you want to read out for us now, Kazuma?
The Bergenworth spiders hide all manner of rituals and keeps our lost master from us. A terrible shame. It makes my head shudder uncontrollably.
As a baby cries in the background. Probably fine.
Please ignore the baby crying.
Please ignore. Please ignore.
The baby is not supposed to be part of the ambience here.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, this is like a late game thing.
Oh, okay.
Part of the thing of like needing to get through the area is like we kind of have to come back with late game characters to kind of be able to do this quickly and not struggle against things. But yeah, it's really interesting. Like you read that message at first, and then like at least I personally think like when you kind of come back to it later, kind of reread it, like oh that makes sense. Which, like, you read the first, like, what the fuck? And now I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I see what they're talking about.
I do want to say really quickly about the graveyard. One thing I noticed that's really interesting, talking about, like, places being repurposed and, like, you have these great massive tombstones that now are, like, it's almost like they've been dug up and moved to make room for other bodies, because the tombstones are, like, all in a cluster, like, off to the side, rather than being, like, laid out in a neat and orderly fashion. And the ground is also kind of lumpy. So it does feel like, you know, this used to be like a neat and orderly graveyard, but at some point, like, exceeded the original capacity. And now, obviously, that's the case because there's just caskets with chains everywhere piling up.
But yeah, I think we can close out on, like, with a view of maybe the last gate, kind of the really big kind of gates kind of up the top of the stairs in this area.
It will unfortunately not be closed.
Oh, that's fine. We can still see the arch. I mean, like... Well, actually, you can go on the other side of it. You can close it from the other side.
Oh, let me close it real quick, everyone. Let me make the city inaccessible for me. Let me get there real quick.
Yeah. And so this gate and the other gate around the corner, like, they have these, like, big frescoes on them. You can kind of, like, look up a little bit, kind of at the top of this, above the kind of the arch, like, over the mantles. Like, there's this, like, big fresco and, like, all kind of very intricate and, like, detailed.
Oh, wow,
and, like,
yeah.
these are really, really ornate and, like, beautiful gates, but they're gates, and they're the biggest gates. When you first play the game, it's very hard to open these gates. You either need to be rich, or you need to kind of do an alternate route, kind of to get through to around them. But, like, this is, like, we are probably the closest most people in the city get to kind of the powers of the city. And the thing that kind of stops them when... most of the time, and also kind of during these cases, are these just massive but beautiful gates.
Mm-hmm.
And also these two dudes.
Yeah, I noticed, like, up in the top, like, corners of them, there's, like, almost like these mechanical, like, things that are, like, pouring something forth, and they have, like, angelic figures. Very interesting. I'm sure we'll get into that more later.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're on time, so let's end with this big gate. Does everyone want to close this out? Kazuma, can you start? Can you give us your outro?
You can find me at twitter.com at justicekazi_ or on Twitch at justicekazi.
You can find me on twitter.com at Casey Crook.
You can find me on Twitter at Chris_Geldart.
You can find me on Twitter at quantum ... and you can find my wrestling story podcast on Twitter at Match Club Pod.
Thank you all for joining. This is really fun. This is like really cool to kind of go around this. Yeah, I'm excited to kind of explore more of the city with you and kind of hear everyone's thoughts and kind of see where all this all goes. But yeah, thank you everyone. Do we have a sign off? Oh, everyone should do a laugh. Everyone should do a Bloodborne laugh for their sign off. I can go first.
Okay. How about we all laugh together so it's really
Yeah, I like
uncomfortable?
Yes, yeah, okay, alright. On the count of 5. So on 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That was really good, Casey.
Great, love it. Thanks everyone.
Bye bye.